Before the world knew emperors and crowns, before Rome's name thundered across continents, there was a republic, fragile, young, and full of pride. It was born from the ashes of kings built by men who swore never again to kneel before one. They built a system of balance, of order, of law. But as centuries passed, balance became a burden, and an ambition became the fire that lit the night sky. He was not born into power. He seized it, piece by piece by piece, battle by battle, whisper by whisper. His rise was not written in scrolls, it was carved in blood. While others dreamed of safety, he dreamed of greatness. He saw the Republic not as it was, but as it could be, vast, eternal, unshakable. And in that vision, the seeds of destiny took root. Every step he took was a rebellion against mediocrity. From the fields of Gaul, where he turned mud into empire, to the heart of Rome, where his name rolled from the lips of the people like prayer, they loved him. The soldier who gave them victory, the leader who bred them bread. They called him Savior, Hero come. And in their cheers, he heard the calling of something greater, something divine. Ambition has a sound. It's not the roar of armies or the clash of swords. It's the whisper of a man alone in the dark, convincing himself he is chosen. That whisper became his companion. It told him that the Senate was old, weak, and corrupt. That Rome needed not a council, but a commander. It told him that his victories were not chance, they were destiny. But destiny is a dangerous word. It blinds the heart and feeds the ego. And soon the line between savior and usurper began to fade. The Republic saw a man on horseback, cloaked in triumph. But behind the laurel crown lay something more, a hunger that no title could satisfy. They say power reveals the truth of a man. His truth was simple. He could not stand beneath another's shadow. He had seen too much of Rome's weakness, too much of her chaos. And so, when he crossed the Rubicon, it was not just a river he defied. It was the entire world that believed one man could not be greater than the state. That night, as his legions marched behind him, the Republic trembled. Not from fear of war, but from the realization that it had created the very monster it swore to destroy. A man so brilliant, so beloved, that even defiance felt like duty. They cheered as he took power, never realizing they were watching the death of freedom dressed in triumph. The marble halls of Rome echoed his footsteps, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed as if the gods themselves bowed. Yet every step forward drew him closer to the edge. Ambition had carried him this far, but ambition, like fire, does not know when to stop burning. He did not conquer Rome with his sword. He conquered it with his charm, his vision, his unstoppable belief that only he could save her. The Republic was not taken. It surrendered. It laid itself at his feet willingly, worshiping the very man who would bury it beneath the weight of his greatness. History would call him many things: hero, tyrant, genius, fool. But one truth remains eternal. Rome did not fall in battle. It fell in admiration. And from its ashes, an empire rose, built on the shoulders of a man who could not stop reaching for the heavens, even as the ground crumbled beneath him. Power, once tasted, never leaves the tongue. It lingers, sweet, intoxicating, and cruel. He stood at the peak of glory, wrapped in victory, surrounded by those who swore their undying loyalty. But loyalty in Rome, it was never love. It was currency, traded, broken, and bought. He had given them triumphs. He had filled their coffers with gold, their streets with festivals, their history with victories that echoed across continents. But the more Rome cheered his name, the quieter the Senate became. For in those marble halls, behind the masks of smiles and togas of honor, the whispers began to grow teeth. He is no longer one of us, they said. He is something greater, and that is the danger. They dined with him, toasted to his name, called him Savior by day and Conspirator by night. They saw what the people could not, that the Republic had begun to fade beneath the shadow of a single man. A man too beloved to challenge, too powerful to resist. So they did what frightened men have always done when faced with greatness. They plotted. He had called them friends, brothers of Rome, guardians of her soul. Yet even as they smiled in his presence, they sharpened daggers beneath the table. Betrayal in Rome was never loud. It was silent, not across a banquet. A letter slipped under torch, a promise made in whispers that reeked of fear and envy. And deep within him, perhaps he knew, perhaps he felt a chill that no armor could protect him from. The cold breath of treachery creeping ever closer. But pride is a dangerous armor. It blinds a man to the truth. He thought himself untouchable, chosen, eternal. Yet history is cruel to those who mistake admiration for loyalty. The Senate feared him because they saw in him a reflection of what they once were, bold, daring, unwilling to bow. But time had turned them into relics, chained by law and tradition. He had broken those chains, and for that he had to fall. Each victory he claimed drew the daggers nearer. Each parade through the forum made the smiles tighter. And when the laurel wreath was placed upon his brow, the Senate did not see honor. They saw a crown. They saw a crown. They saw the death of everything Rome once swore to protect. So they gathered men of name, men of legacy, men who had once called him friend. They spoke of liberty, of restoring the republic, of saving Rome from tyranny. But beneath their noble words lay the oldest motive of all, fear. Fear that he had become a god among men, and that they, the Senate of Rome, had become his priests. The plan was simple, the moment precise, the betrayal perfect. And yet, fate has always smiled with bitter irony. For in killing the man, they did not save the republic, they sealed its fate. The blood that would spill on the Ides of March would not cleanse Rome, it would baptize an empire. He had once believed that destiny had chosen him. Perhaps it had, not to build Rome's eternity, but to be its sacrifice. To prove that greatness, no matter how divine it seems, always walks hand in hand with betrayal. And so, as he walked into the Senate chamber for the last time, surrounded by those who had eaten at his table, fought by his side, sworn their loyalty in the name of Rome, the whispers turned to blaze. And the man who had conquered the world learned the one truth he had always denied, that even the mighty can fall, not to armies, but to the hands of those they trust most. Some men chase greatness, others are chased by it. From the moment he drew breath, destiny had marked him, not with crowns or blessings, but with burdens, to command, to conquer, to rise above the limits of men and shape the course of history itself. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. To him, the stars above Rome did not twinkle, they called. Each victory was not just triumph. It was confirmation, a sign that the gods themselves had chosen him to lift Rome from its mortal shell and make her eternal. The soldiers who followed him did not see a man. They saw destiny wearing flesh. And perhaps he began to believe it too. Every battle won whispered of fate. Every enemy who fell before his legion spoke of prophecy. The more he achieved, the louder the universe seemed to answer him. When he looked at the Senate, he did not see equals. He saw obstacles. When he looked at the people, he did not see citizens, he saw believers. Rome was no longer a republic of men, it was a stage for a god's ascension. But destiny, like the sea, is never tamed. It lifts a man to the heavens only to test if he can breathe the air of the divine. And as he rose, the air grew thinner, colder, more distant. The faces that once smiled began to turn. The cheers that once filled the forum began to sound like warnings. Even the gods, it seemed, had grown silent. He was surrounded by the trophies of his greatness, the banners, the victories, the monuments, yet deep inside, he felt the solitude that only destiny can bring. For every triumph claimed, a friend was lost. For every power gained, a piece of himself faded away. Greatness, he realized, was not a gift, it was a debt, and the gods always collect. Still, he pressed forward, for how could he stop? The wheel of fate had already turned. To step back was to invite chaos. To hesitate was to die forgotten. He told himself he was not hungry for power, that he only sought Rome's future. But the truth is simpler and far more human. He wanted to be remembered, to be more than flesh, more than dust. He wanted eternity to speak his name. And so he began to see signs everywhere, in omens, in dreams, in the silence of the stars. The Ides approached, and though others felt the dread of what was coming, he saw only glory. He believed destiny had led him to this. Not as a man walking into danger, but as one walking into immortality. History has a cruel sense of irony. The same belief that made him unstoppable also made him blind. Destiny is not a crown, it is a chain wrapped in gold. And as he walked toward the Senate that fateful morning, surrounded by marvel and men, he carried that chain proudly, unaware it would soon tighten around his throat. They would write his name for centuries. His face would adorn statues, his deeds retold by scholars and soldiers alike. And yet, behind all the grandeur, behind the marble and the myth, remains a truth too human to ignore, that destiny never chooses without cost. It lifts a man to the stars only to remind him, in the end, that he was always meant to fall. A power is the most dangerous illusion of all. It begins as a gift, the ability to command, to shape, to protect. But in time, it becomes something else. It stops serving the man who holds it and demands that he serve it instead. He once carried power as a weapon, sharp and swift. But now it carried him, bending his choices, reshaping his heart. Every word he spoke became law. Every command he gave turned to destiny. The republic that once restrained kings now bowed before a single word. And in that silence of submission, Rome changed. Not overnight, but heartbeat by heartbeat. He believed power could be controlled, that he could wield it without losing himself. Yet the truth of history is cruel. No man holds power for long before it begins to hold him. It does not corrupt suddenly. It whispers, it flatters, it convinces. It tells him he is the savior, the chosen one, the only hand that can guide the storm. And so he listened. The Senate still existed, yes, but it was an echo, a shadow of its fullness. The men who once debated laws now waited for his approval. The republic did not die with a sword. It died with applause. The people cheered not for freedom, but for security. They did not want leaders who argued. They wanted a God who commanded, and he became that God. The laurel crown upon his head, once a symbol of triumph, began to feel heavier each day. A crown of vines tightening with unseen thorns. He could not rest. Power had made him immortal in the eyes of Rome and his own mind. Every night he stood on his balcony, looking over the city he had conquered, wondering if this silence, this stillness, was the peace he'd fought for, or the calm before the storm. He had given the world structure, glory and order, yet in return it had taken his humanity. The laughter of friends, the warmth of trust, all gone, replaced by cautious nods and fearful obedience. To rule alone is to live alone, and in that loneliness he began to see the true price of glory. He had thought that power would bring control, but it brought only reflection. Every statue, every triumph, every decree reminded him that he had not just changed Rome, he had ended her dream. The republic he swore to protect now lived only in memory, in whispers among philosophers and poets, too afraid to speak aloud. And still, he justified it. He told himself that people needed strength, that chaos must be crushed, that order required sacrifice. But deep down, he knew he was no longer ruling for Rome. He was ruling for the echo of his own greatness. The man who had once fought for the soul of his nation now fought only to preserve the image of himself the world adored. History would immortalize him as the founder of empire. Statues would rise, his name etched in gold. Yet no inscription can capture the truth that haunted him, that the same power that lifted him above all men also stripped him of what made him one. In the end, Rome had gained an emperor, but lost its freedom. And he, in his pursuit of eternal glory, had lost something far greater, the peace that comes from being human. Every empire begins with belief and ends with betrayal. He had conquered the world, yet he could not conquer fear. Not his own, not Rome's, not the fear that festers in the hearts of men when they stand in the shadow of greatness. On the morning of his end, the sky hung heavy with omen. The streets of Rome, once filled with the roar of triumph, now murmured in unease. The same people who once shouted his name now whispered it like a secret. Even the gods, it seemed, had turned their gaze away. He entered the Senate not as a conqueror, but as a man, unguarded, unarmed, unaware that the moment he had always feared had come at last. Around him stood those he trusted, allies, friends, brothers in arms, faces he had once shared wine and victory with, faces that now hid the storm behind calm eyes. The betrayal did not come with thunder or shouts. It came in silence, a silence thick enough to suffocate the room. And then the first dagger fell, then another and another, not from strangers, but from the very hands he had lifted from dust and made powerful. He turned, not in anger, but in disbelief. How strange it must have felt to see love and loyalty melt into treachery in the blink of an eye. To see the republic he tried to save take its vengeance in blood. They struck him not because he was cruel, but because he was too great. And in their fear of his power, they gave birth to something far greater than him. The empire he had only begun to dream of. As he fell, time seemed to slow. The marble floor that once echoed his victories now drank his blood. His last breath carried no curse, no plea, only understanding. The man who thought himself eternal now realized that even destiny has a master. And so, on the Ides of March, the Republic took its final breath beside him. The daggers that ended his life did not save her. They immortalized him. For while his body fell, his idea, his vision of a Rome united under one will, survived. And from that vision, emperors would rise, thrones would be forged, and the world would kneel to a name that no blade could kill. He became a ghost that haunted history. Every ruler after him would chase his shadow. Every tyrant would see him in their reflection. His life became a warning, and his death a prophecy. The marble that bore his stain would outlast those who betrayed him. The very men who struck him down would be forgotten by time, their names washed away like dust in the Tiber. But his would echo through centuries, whispered by emperors, feared by kings, remembered by civilizations yet unborn. In the end, he did not fail. He became something far more powerful than a man. He became a myth, and myths, unlike men, do not die. Rome would rise again from its ashes, stronger, grander, crowned not in freedom, but in empire. And through it all, his voice would linger, a silent reminder to all who dare to reach for greatness, that the higher you climb, the sharper the fall, but the louder the echo that follows.